Let's say you're in the market for a new pair of headphones. What do you buy? Dynamic or planar driver? Perhaps you splurge and lean towards electrostatic. Which brand? How large or heavy? And most of all, what sound signature? There are so many headphones and IEMs that you could go crazy trying to find the perfect one for you. Now, FiiO has added to the confusion with its first over-ear headphone, the FT3. The folks at Apos Audio loaned me the FT3 to review. Apos is among a few online retailers that specializes in audiophile gear, from the mundane to the exotic. Check them out if you're itching to spend some cash this holiday season. Now, let's delve into the FT3, a $300 headphone from a company that has never before made one of these. FiiO decided to make the FT3 a 350 ohm headphone, which is clearly on the top end of typical audiophile gear. FiiO says they opted for the higher impedance so that noise would be mitigated, resulting in what they claim will be, quote, unmatched listening experience. FiiO, as usual with all of their products, spends a lot of time discussing the FT3's construction. Some of this material might sway audiophiles impressed with a few technicalities, but to most, FiiO's marketing is typical fluff. What really counts is how the company describes the sound signature. Unfortunately, FiiO does not provide a frequency response graph for the FT3. Rather, they claim that this headphone has, quote, deep bass and an immersive listening experience. That's not much to go on. Now, you can easily find frequency response graphs for this headphone online. Depending on which measurement you consider more reliable, you will either see a bass roll-off or an emphasis. As for build, look, I have reviewed many dozens of headphones. It is rare that I find one that I think is really well made. And the FT3 definitely falls into this category. It is made primarily of metal. The ear cups have sufficient horizontal and vertical swivel, allowing for a more contoured fit. The headband is lightly padded but has a suspension system. This suspension does not have too much resistance, which allows for a fairly comfortable experience overall. The ear cups do not have significant clamping force, and in my estimation, the FT3's clamp is less than that of the HD6XX and LCD1, but greater than the Harmonic Dyne Zeus and Poseidon. FiiO includes an impressive quality of accessories. We get a leather hardshell case reminiscent of what Sendy Audio has been doing for a few years. We also get a very lengthy braided cable which comes out to about 10 feet. Moreover, FiiO created a cable with interchangeable terminators. You have to unscrew them from the cable and pull once loosened. We get 3.5mm and 4.4mm interchangeable terminators. Along with that, we also get a 1/4 inch and XLR adapters to pair with the single-ended and balanced terminators. And brace yourselves, spare ear pads. Well, actually, there are alternative ear pads, but I will take them with glee. After years of complaining, finally, a company throws in one of these simple accessories. Now, the standard ear pads pre-fitted on the FT3 are suede. FiiO says these will present a balanced sound signature. The alternative protein leather ear pads, they say, will present a clearer sound and larger soundstage. These ear pads are proprietary, which is one downside. As for comfort, I have to emphasize how easy this headphone is to wear. The clamping force is just about right for me. The headband is very comfortable. The swivel on the ear cups is enough for a pleasant feeling fit. And the headphone is not particularly heavy, which allowed me to wear it for 4 hours at a time without difficulty. The only gripe I have is with the 10-foot cable. I really wish FiiO had used a shorter 5-foot cable or thrown a shorter cable into the box as another accessory. Overall, the FT3 is a masterclass example of well-thought-out design. The stealth black scheme is eye-catching, although that FiiO logo on the ear cups can be fairly distracting. My concerns about the build and accessories of this headphone are frankly quite minor. I listened to the FT3 for 2 weeks and used it as my go-to headphone for nearly everything when attached to my desk or portable player. I listened to lossless FLAC on my devices, streamed high-resolution audio from Amazon Music HD, lossy content from Spotify and Netflix, and watched shows and movies through other media. Throughout my testing phase, I used numerous sources with the FT3. This includes the Gustard H16 paired with my Cambridge CXN, the Burson 3XR, Mytek Brooklyn DAC Plus, Matrix Mini I and Mini I Pro 3, Wu Audio WA7 Gen 2, Quad PA1, Low2PA 6000, Low2PA S1, and EcoZorda ITM03. None of these devices struggle to drive the FT3. Dynamic drivers are generally pretty easy to power, and even the ITM03 was plenty capable of providing enough power for peak performance in my opinion. I conducted my tests initially with the suede earpads. I then switched to the pleather earpads. Unfortunately, since I do not have a second pair of FT3, I cannot do an A-B comparison, so I can't tell you how the two earpads really compare. I will provide a very general impression of the pleather earpads later in this review. With all that said, let's talk about the overall sound signature. FiiO claims that the FT3 has deep bass. Notice how they did not say powerful bass, because the FT3 does not have that. Deep, well, maybe, if you look at the frequency response that they claim. In Mountains by Hans Zimmer, my go-to track to test bass rendition, the FT3 really struggled to reproduce the sub-bass rumble that is prevalent throughout the song. That bass emphasis should be obvious from the get-go. But even with volume turned up on my Gustard H16 through balanced output, the FT3 was simply not able to render the low rumble consistently. In the middle of the track, when the crescendo hits, the FT3 made all the elements sound a bit muddy, their tonalities and notes melding together. Bass transience was on the slower side, slower than what I heard on the more neutral audeze 4X. Bass clarity was not too dissimilar from what I heard on the HD6XX, which I compared back and forth on my passive switchbox. Drum strikes are audible, but not hard or sharp. In Conquer by Overwork, a drum-heavy track, the FT3 made each drum strike sound like a heavy thud rather than a piercing or loud thwack. Similarly, in Irodori by Kodo, the various drums sounded somewhat distant, less impactful than what I heard on the S4X and the S5X. The FT3's rendition in this regard was kind of like what I heard on the HD6XX. The mids on the FT3 are, on the other hand, clear and forward. There is an audible emphasis around the 3 kHz region. This is obvious with female vocals where the FT3 pushes sibilants into the ears. When I compared to the S5X and S4X, the FT3's sibilants and vocal grain was more obvious. Even the HD6XX had a more neutral rendition in this regard. Male vocalists do not receive this kind of sibilance emphasis, however. In Superposition by Young the Giant, the FT3's presentation of the male vocalist was closer to neutral, without pushing any of that sibilance. Separation and clarity of mid-centric elements was similar to what I heard on the HD6XX and the S4X. The S5X had a bit more clarity and separation. In Watch It Back by Haim, the FT3 did present the two backup vocalists, but their voices were not nearly as clear as they were on the S5X. When all the elements started playing, the primary vocalists remained distinct and ahead, but the backup artists were harder to hear. The treble is fairly neutral on the FT3, if perhaps a marginal reduction in the mid to upper treble. In Scherzo for X-Wings, the FT3 easily rendered the brass and horns. This was similar to what I heard in the S4X, but not quite as clear as on the S5X. The FT3 let me identify the various group sets, but none outshone any other. In Flight from the City, the FT3 presented the piano and cello fairly close to the ears. The S5X, in contrast, pushes both instruments further back. Clarity between these instruments was slightly more obvious on the FT3 than on the HD6XX. The electric buzzing effects, pops and sizzles, and creaking sounds in this track were just about audible on the FT3. These all were much more obvious on the S5X. As for detail, my overall impression is that the FT3 is slightly above average in this regard. In my New Light footstep test, I counted 8 footsteps. The HD6XX and LCD1 each rendered 7. The Neumann NDH20 presented 5 to 6. The S5X presented 10. And the DT1990 rendered 10 to 11. The FT3 is capable of presenting details, just not significantly more clearly than other competing headphones. On the one hand, its detail retrieval is similar to that of the much more expensive Audeze LCD2 Classic, but it is not that much better than the cheaper HD6XX. The FT3 was able to present multiple vocalists in a mix, but layered vocals, those like in superposition, those were not audible. And while the FT3 is capable of revealing background details such as electric buzzing, creaking of wood, pops and sizzles, wind, and sharp intakes of breaths, the headphone is not going to shove those details into your ears. In regards to soundstage, I think the FT3 has slightly above average soundstage. It is wider than the HD6XX and LCD1, but nowhere as wide as the hi-fi meze Sundara. Of course, soundstage is an impression brought on through the original recording, ear pads, and whether the headphones receive sufficient power for peak performance, among some other factors. So your impression might be a little different. One thing I will staunchly say is that the FT3 makes no new ground and does not have expensive soundstage. If you want wide soundstage headphones, then those do exist, and they do it a lot better than the FT3 in my opinion. Overall, my subjective listening tests with the suede earpads leave me thinking this is a balanced tuning. I do not agree with commentary that the FT3 has elevated bass. Deep? Well, maybe, in the sense that you can hear sub-bass, just not particularly well. Mid-bass is closer to neutral. Overall bass clarity is, frankly, average. The mids are slightly forward. Vocals always stand apart from instruments. There's a 3 kHz emphasis that makes itself known through female artists and sibilant spikes. The treble is slightly rolled off in the mid to upper area, but otherwise sounds close to neutral. Now, with regard to the protein leather earpads, there is a fairly noticeable difference from the suede earpads. Sub-bass is stronger, mid-bass has harder and sharper impact, and clarity in the bass seems more noticeable with the pleather earpads. Transients does not appear to change between the two pads, but maybe that's just my mistake since I can't really do an A-B comparison. The mids are similar on both pads. I think that the pleather pads reduce a bit of the sibilance that is present on the suede earpads. Mid-center clarity is more noticeable on the pleather pads. The treble does not seem to change much between the two earpads. The only thing I could pick out is that the pleather earpads seem to have a bit more clarity to the treble, but not noticeably greater energy. Detail retrieval using the pleather pads is somewhat better. Creaking of wood, intakes of breath, multiple vocalists, twangs of guitar strings, and similar kinds of details are more noticeable on the pleather earpads. On my new light test, the pleather pads rendered 11 footsteps. Finally, regarding soundstage, the pleather earpads do have a bit more soundstage than the suede, but still not as wide as the hi-fi meze Sundara. I am impressed with FiiO's first over-ear headphone. This is an excellent start, and I hope the company builds on this success. The FT3 has solid but comfortable build. The aesthetics will be hit or miss, just like any aesthetic, but I personally find the headphone quite attractive, except for that FiiO logo. The accessories are all quite good. The only gripe here is that the cable is far too long, and I would have preferred either a shorter one or an extra 5-foot long cable. The FT3 shows what mindful, careful planning can achieve. The alternative earpads really do give you different sound signatures. Not dramatic, not night and day alterations, but enough to keep one interested. Sure, you can do something like this with a lot of other headphones if you buy spare earpads for them. But on the FT3, at least you don't have to spend more money to get that done. As a contrary example, take a look at Moondrop Void. That headphone was a chore. Bad fit, poor construction, uncomfortable earpads, average overall performance. That headphone has no business costing $200. While I was testing the FT3, I kept thinking about which headphones come close to its sound signature. Now, at first I thought maybe the HD6XX was the closest analog, and perhaps that's true to some regard with the suede earpads on the FT3, but that impression is inapplicable when switched to the pleather earpads. Headphones like the Harmonic Dyne Zeus and Poseidon are not nearly as detailed or clear as the FT3. Instead, I think the Harmonic Dyne headphones have a smoother, warmer, more relaxed sound. The Rode NTH100 is noticeably more neutral. It has greater bass emphasis, more neutral mids, and slightly more energetic treble. And then I remembered my Bass Audio G12. I reviewed that open back headphone 3 years ago. I brought it down from my shelf and listened back and forth between it and the FT3. And no, they don't really sound the same. What this leads me to say is that I think the FT3 is not a copy and paste job. Oh, yeah, I'm sure there's something in the market that comes close to the FT3 sound signature. I mean, there's so many headphones, there's just gotta be. I might even have one of those somewhere lying around, but nothing really jumps out in my mind. Ultimately, with all that said, I think the FT3 is, frankly, a really good headphone. It does things quite well. I would not recommend this headphone for anyone who is very sensitive to sibilants or anyone who wants a bassy signature. But at $300, the FT3 is a fair price for everything you get, and I think it is worth serious consideration. And if you do choose to buy it, I hope you think about buying it from Apos Audio. Now, they were kind enough to let me borrow this headphone for a bit. I'm a little sad to send it back, but I hope it finds a good home.